Hi, my name is Patty Burnley, and the title of my action research study is Improving English Learners' Reading Comprehension Through Small Group Vocabulary Interventions. Some of the key words for my project include ELs, otherwise known as English learners, vocabulary, interventions, reading comprehension, small group, and SLA, also referred to as second language acquisition. I also included my abstract if you'd like to read it. So the abstract just is an overview, which I will go into more detail and include the same information in the following slides. A little bit of background information. To start with the demographics of the participants, I teach 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, and I had 11 3rd grade ELs. Started with 14, 2 of them moved away, and 1 went back to Mexico for about 3.5, almost 4 weeks. So it went from 14 down to 11. All but 2 of them live below the poverty line, and reading and literacy and education is not a priority, unfortunately, in those households. 1 EL is from China. I have another one from South Vietnam, 1 from Turkey, and the rest, the other 8, are from Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Mostly from Mexico, though, so mostly Spanish-speaking ELs. And again, I work at Henderson Elementary, that's in the Francis House School District in St. Charles. The problem that I saw to start with was that mostly for the main part, my ELs are almost always reading below grade level. Every once in a while they catch up, but overall they're below grade level. So I started thinking, why is that? Obviously it's reading comprehension. Whenever I test them, when I talk to their classroom teachers, it's normally the reading comprehension portion that they struggle on. I wasn't sure at first if it was just general reading comprehension, lack of vocabulary, the fact that they had trouble thinking about what they read and putting that into words and then saying it, because that's a lot of English proficiency skills that they need, and many of my ELs are lower. So I thought maybe it's just the fact that it's hard for them to get their words out, get their thoughts out. The more I looked into it, the more I realized that it was vocabulary, or I should say a lack of vocabulary. Therefore, I formed my research question, which is, what happens to the reading comprehension of my 3rd grade ELs when I provide direct vocabulary instruction using 3 different research-based vocabulary interventions? Here you can see this year, 2018 through 2019's reading levels for my ELs in 3rd grade. And you can see that I color-coded them. And unfortunately, only 1 of them that I gave them pseudonames. So DHC for the 2nd quarter of 3rd grade was reading at level N, which is the only time that I've had one of my 3rd grade ELs reading on grade level. Unfortunately, he did not show any progress for 3rd quarter, as well as for 4th quarter. And a side note here, the 4th quarter reading levels are not 100% accurate. That's just where they are at as of right now. I'm sure they will be tested again within the next 2.5 weeks before school's out. But according to their classroom teachers, this is where they are as of last week. Also, you can see that I have a wide variety. I start at the lowest level is BSV, and his his reading level was at the beginning of the year at a level E. So by far he was my lowest reader, and he's also one of the newest ELs that I have who just moved here from Mexico. So no big surprise there. You can see if you jump to the 4th quarter, they're expected to be at a reading level P, and I have some that are kind of close, not quite there, but almost there, which is at least they're showing some progress. And again, this just kind of shows my point that overall my ELs are usually below grade level, sometimes just by a level or two, sometimes greater by multiple levels. Here you can see just 4 of the 30 plus articles that I've reviewed for my literature review portion that help to have my research focused, research based, and help drive my research from the beginning, even as I kind of change things up in the middle of my interventions. Here, the first one is from 2016, and in this study, they focus to address the problem of ELs, and specifically the lower level ELs, very close to the ones that I have. And they compared bilingual classrooms to English only classrooms. And they noticed that with ELs, a big problem was their lack of vocabulary knowledge, but then also, which really helped drive my instruction in the classroom as I kind of changed things up to benefit my ELs, is also using that vocabulary in the proper context. So that was really important for me, not only to teach vocabulary, but also to make sure that they know how to use it, not just as the author is using it, but also in different ways, if there are different ways to use it, or at least use it in the proper context. The second one here just talked about the history of how SLA, or again, second language acquisition, affects the ELs who are learning English as they're learning, and how that affects their reading comprehension. So this one was from 2015, and I learned so much from her. She had what she referred to as VLSs, and those are vocabulary learning strategies. I learned a lot, and I actually borrowed some from her and kind of made my own spin on them to help make sure that I focused on what my ELs could benefit from and what they really needed help on. My third literature review article here was from 2003, and this author was in many articles that I read. He was referred to often, he was quoted, and many people found his research to be very insightful, as I did. And in this article, specifically this one, I focused on how many words per week my ELs need to learn or can learn in order to be effective. I knew not to overwhelm them. I did give them a pretest of 10 vocabulary words, which seemed to overwhelm them a bit. They were guessing, they were using the actual vocabulary word in its definition. So that gave me a lot of insight that, one, I probably picked too many words at once, even though it was a pre-test of vocabulary. So this article was very helpful, and this author was very helpful. And I looked up some of his other research and other, published literature, and I learned a lot from him. My last one, I just read a little blurb, and that's from Burns in 2017. And Burns had a lot as well, but specifically, he focused on how to teach ELs vocabulary, being very explicit and systematic, and then making sure that you're involving them, engaging them, hands-on activities, drawing pictures, doing things that are going to get them involved so that they remember and retain that new knowledge that they just learned, but also help them themselves to construct the knowledge and the learning and make meaning of the different vocabulary so that it connects to them, which I thought was really interesting and helpful. So getting into the beginning of my research, I started before the vocabulary pre-test. I actually started with a pre-intervention is what I called it, but it was more of just a reading attitude survey, just to gauge the attitudes and the responses that I got from my ELs. I just gave a sample of kind of like a paraphrasing and a sample of their responses. Obviously, I don't have each response, but I try to get as many that could fit in here as possible. At the top, you can see that I had 3 different small groups of my 3rd grade ELs. My first group met in the morning, and we focus on vocabulary anyway, so it was a pretty easy transition. And in this group, since they are my highest level ELs, I didn't have as many drawings and drawing pictures. We did a lot of oral discussions. I led discussions. I let them lead discussions. We did more of acting out little skits, playing charades, trying to guess which vocabulary word they had, which was a lot of fun and very engaging. And so for that group, again, they are my highest ELs, my first group that I met with first thing in the morning, and it wasn't as much hands-on writing stuff, but it was more acting out and discussing, working on a lot of those oral communication skills. My second group, they were a mix of my mid to lower ELs, and we used the Frayer model, and we created little vocabulary journals. It didn't work quite as well as I thought it would. The vocabulary journals ended up just being like packets, not really folded over like I had imagined originally. And I went with the Frayer model because multiple sources I read that's the most helpful, one of the most effective and helpful ways for ELs to learn, because they have the word that they have to write in the middle, and then they write a picture, or they draw a picture. They can write examples, antonyms, or synonyms to help them. And that's the connectivity part, where they make connections. They connect to that word and kind of build off of what they know in their past background and experiences. I like that they had to use the words in sentences, because that would tell me if they understood the proper context or not. In most cases, they did not. My last group, group 3, those are my lowest ELs. And in this group, they did the flashcards. Originally, I was not going to do flashcards, but after reading an article about how engaging it is for students to write the vocabulary word on one side and on the other side draw a picture that they came up with themselves, that was really powerful and helpful. So I really enjoyed making those flashcards with the students. And one key piece of advice that I took from the article that gave me the idea was that it was not my role to model necessarily, which I'm used to doing, because then they get whatever picture I draw stuck in their head and then they copy. So for it to be unique, I could not draw a picture. I could just give them ideas. Here you can see some different responses if you want to read through those. These were the questions that I included on that pre-intervention reading attitude survey. Again, I just called it reading question survey, whatever. Here are some examples of student work that my ELs created during their vocabulary interventions. Unfortunately, I was unable to include any of the Frayer models, because when I scanned them in and tried to pull them up on the computer, since they used pencil, none of them really showed up very well. So that was unfortunate, but that was a learning opportunity for me in the future to allow them to go over it, possibly with colored pencils or thin markers or felt tip pens. Here you can see 2 different ELs examples from my lowest 3rd group, group number 3, and they created these examples. So at the top you have the picture they drew for the word tropical, and right underneath was where they wrote the word tropical on the other side of the flashcard. At the top right, underneath the word work, you can see this is an example of how they define the word roof, top of a structure. I was really impressed that one of my lower ELs knew the word structure instead of building or school or house or whatever. And then tree bark, they drew a picture of a tree and they pointed to the bark, which I was also very impressed. And that's a skill that I had previously taught them, of using non-linguistic representation if they had trouble finding the right words or sentences, or just the right way to write or say something, they could draw a picture. At the bottom, you can see a picture. Somebody drew a picture of an orangutan. And then tropical, just put a question mark because they weren't sure. And then for rainforest, they did some raindrops and a bunch of trees, which I thought was great because they broke down the word. They did rain, and then they did a bunch of trees to represent the forest. And over to the far right bottom, you can see one of my higher level ELs, and they didn't have an idea for the word handy. And also there's a second word on there that they did not have any idea for, so they just did question marks, which was fine. And then you can see their answers here. So again, here's just a few examples of some student work that they did throughout the beginning and in the middle of the intervention. On my last slide, I have included results and implications of my research. To start with the results, I did notice some improvement in progression and how well my ELs were able to show and represent their reading comprehension, even if it wasn't in words or writing. They were able to show me pictures, which was great. Again, some of them rushed through some assignments and or just didn't really care to try hard enough, weren't really motivated, or didn't give forth a lot of effort. And two of them specifically, I know, just weren't following my directions. They weren't highlighting words from the text that they had trouble with. They weren't going back in the text and looking for the answers. Therefore, that's the lack of effort that I saw, and or just not paying attention to directions. As far as the knowledge of learning new vocabulary, I realize that is an important part of reading comprehension, but in this case, I was kind of surprised that it only played a small role. There were a lot of other factors, and you can see I listed them here. And I have been working with these kiddos all year on different strategies. A few of them, I would say about half of them, did use a strategy or two that we had learned previously in the school year, which I was excited about. But overall, I didn't really see them remembering that past learning, so that was helpful for me. I took note of that. And then benefits of my interventions, I think that I gave them more strategies, and I gave them an opportunity to practice using those strategies multiple times throughout the 4.5, almost 5 weeks that I did the interventions. And I think that for the lower level ELs, it was great for them to be able to have different ways to show their learning other than just having to write or say what they just read. Implications include me personally. It gave me a lot of information and insight to what I'm doing well and what I need to improve on, which I think was great. Reflecting back onto it, I realized even though vocabulary instruction is important, it's not a be-all, fix-all for reading comprehension. It's just part of the puzzle. It's just a piece that they need to learn more strategies and tools for their, their EL toolbox is kind of what we call it, but just to help them be more successful. And it was kind of eye-opening that I realized I wasn't doing as much front-loading of vocabulary as I used to in the past. This is my first year at the school. In the past, I dedicated 20 minutes every day to doing front-loading for the next day's or next week's lessons. And so that was a really eye-opening learning for me personally that I think I'm going to have to change for next year. Also, I think I can share this information with teachers, show them about the non-linguistic representation, how we did some charades and acted things out, the different techniques and different methods that I used, and then the different strategies that they were able to use in their learning of new vocabulary. Last but not least, I do believe that there could be more studies that I could do. I could, and probably will, kind of continue this into next year to see what else works well, what might not work so well for one group, maybe for younger kids, older kids, more advanced level. And, obviously it depends on, the background and abilities and knowledge level of each group. So I'm kind of interested to see how what I did with these vocabulary interventions, how those carry through in the future and how well they work for different groups of ELs that I work with. So thank you for taking time to view my project and listen to me. I learned a lot from this, and I was very lucky to be able to do something that was able to improve my future teaching. So thank you.